You're watching Economics Amplified, the latest thinking on the biggest issues from UChicago's Becker Friedman Institute.
Thank you for coming. This is part of the Friedman Forum undergraduate lecture series, and this was created for undergraduates, offering them an opportunity for informal discussions with prominent economists. These casual and flexible talks will highlight economic analysis as a powerful tool for understanding a wide range of real-world issues and problems. And it is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you our distinguished speaker today, Professor Nancy Stokey. She's the Frederick Henry Prince Distinguished Service Professor of Economics here at the University of Chicago. Professor Stokey published numerous works on economic growth and development and other economic issues. Now, closely to what you are studying in macroeconomics, she has written quite a bit on timing consistency issue, on the importance of consistency in policy making, and contributed significantly to the literature, and particularly how reputation plays a role in that literature. To me personally, the book she co-authored with Professor Bob Lucas, Recursive Methods in Economic Dynamics, served as my sort of a Bible when I was a grad student, and it still does when I prepare for my lecture here. And it still serves as the gold standard for macroeconomic textbooks as of today. Related to today's lecture, Professor Stokey was selected or elected to serve in the Copenhagen Consensus in 2004, in which 8 renowned world economists employed cost-benefit analysis to prioritize solutions to a number of the most pressing challenges such as poverty and environment. Hence, we will hear a unique and interesting account for many development issues in today's lecture. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Stokey.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you all for coming. So my subject is the Millennium Development Goals. And looking around the room, I mean, most of you are undergraduates, so you probably don't even remember the turn of the millennium. I mean, you were alive, but you were focusing on other, issues, like learning how to tie your shoes or, something like that. But at the turn of the millennium, the United Nations, the turn of the millennium, it was like New Year's, New Year's Day. You have to make some resolutions. So the United Nations made, 8 resolutions. They announced 8 goals, and there they are. And they were to be achieved by 2015. So the goals were to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality and empower women, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and develop a global partnership for development. Okay, I mean, it's a great set of goals. So that's so far so good. So, now 2015 is just around the corner. So, it's a good time to take a look and see like how well has the world done with these goals. And so we can ask, what kind of progress has been made. And then ask, to the extent that, the goals have been achieved, why? Like what's been the source of that? Does it have anything to do with the UN, for example? Or is the UN just going to be taking credit? It's like if the rain falls, well, that's nice, but the UN didn't make it happen. Okay, so I'm going to spend most of the talk looking at the goals that have been, the last set of goals. And in particular, I'm going to focus on goal number 1, eliminate extreme poverty and hunger. 8 goals is just a lot. And then I'm going to look briefly at the progress on the education and health goals. So that'll just be very fast. Then we'll talk about, like what's been the source of, accomplishment or lack of accomplishment of these goals. And then I'm going to end with, since it's, as I said, 2015 is around the corner. The UN has a working group that's working on the next set of goals. So I'll close with, they don't fit all on one slide, but we'll close with a list of those goals and then maybe have a discussion about what the next set of goals should be. Okay, so I'm going to talk, to a large extent about economic growth. So I want to start by just setting a broader stage for thinking about, like eradicating poverty. So look at a broader time horizon, kind of look at a global view of, income levels around the world, and then look a little bit more specifically at, where the problematic parts of the globe still are. And then we're going to have sort of a little economics lecture on what are the sources of growth. And I want to break that into two parts. One is the kind of the proximate sources. So that's going to have to do just if you take just a one-step view, like what is it that makes a country more productive? And I'm going to conclude that technology is the key factor. You've probably heard that before in your macroeconomics courses. And then I want to think about, so if technology is the source of growth, why hasn't everybody been able to tap into that technology? So we're going to think about why some regions of the world have been successful and others have not yet, climbed on the bandwagon. Okay, and then as I said, we'll look at the progress on some of those other goals. Some of the rest of them, like empowering women, it's a great idea, but I don't know how to measure progress on that. So that's going to have to be somebody else's lecture. Okay, so first we're just going to take kind of a helicopter tour of, income levels and increases in income, from a global perspective. So I want to start with this map, and the only thing I really want you to see from the map is that it's a reasonable thing to think of the world in geographic regions. So in this map, like dark green is the highest income. So you see the US and Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and kind of northwestern Europe are all dark green. Then, the lighter shades of green are not quite so good. So we get some of the rest of Europe, we get Argentina. Then when we get into the orange, light orange is like not so great, but not terrible, and that dark orange is really poor. So this map, it seems to be a little bit old, and you see that like where are the really poor areas? They're in sub-Saharan Africa. Those gray areas in the middle, they're just missing data. Whoever did this map didn't try very hard. They could have gotten data. China and India still look pretty poor. But this is just to show you that, because next I want to think about things by continent. So this is just to convince you that that's like a reasonable thing to do. Okay, so here's some statistics. This is like for a 60-year period. And like mainly what I want you to see here is that there are two groups of countries that have had, high and growing incomes over this whole period. So the solid line is Western Europe. This broken line is what Angus Madison calls the Western offshoots. So that's the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Those four countries have all been extremely successful, Western Europe as well. Then we have a group of countries kind of here in the middle, and those are Eastern Europe, West Asia, and Latin America. And then down here at the bottom, we have East Asia and Africa. And you see, in the last decade, Eastern Europe is showing some progress, and East Asia is showing some progress. Okay, now this next picture, this also looks by region. It breaks down, notice the richest countries are just taken off this graph. They change the scale and makes it makes it hard to look at the less rich regions. So here we see, what you see is the former Soviet Union was kind of in the middle there. They collapsed when the Berlin Wall came down, and then now they're coming back. You see here East Asia, which started out pretty much, well, here at the bottom of the scale. You see lots of progress in East Asia. You also see quite a bit of progress. South Asia starts here at the bottom, and you see quite a lot of progress there. A lot of these middle-income countries are kind of, you know, as regions, they're just kind of moving along, not really making a lot of progress, but not desperately poor. So if you think about extreme poverty, these middle-income countries are not where you find the extreme poverty. Okay, so now I want to think about growth. And this picture looks at growth over a long period, almost 50 years. And here, we're just measuring growth, you know, relative to US growth. So on the x-axis is GDP per capita. This is 127 countries. GDP per capita relative to the US in 1960 and in 2008. So what can we see from this picture? So the colors and shapes are, you know, different geographic regions. Well, we see over this whole period, you know, Africa, they started poor, and they've fallen even farther behind. So the U.S., if you know, the U.S. is that point up in the, you know, the northeast corner up there, right on the 45-degree line. So 1-1 is the U.S. Countries which have grown more slowly than the U.S. are below the 45-degree line, and the ones that have grown more rapidly are above. And so we see there have been a few countries that have been spectacularly successful over this longer period. So the East Asian miracles are those stars: Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and so on. The red circles are Western European countries that started out less rich than the US and have grown more rapidly. Less rich because they're to the left of 1. And then Latin America, you know, kind of a mixed bag here. Now, you know, we've seen like a lot of the real poverty is in Africa. So I want to focus on Africa. So this picture looks at just GDP per capita in absolute terms in Africa. It's 1970, you know, versus 1990. And these, you know, these purple lines are growth rates. So a country on, say, this middle line would be growing at an average rate of 2%. So you see that over this 20-year period from 70 to 90, and 2% would be about the US rate. So most of the African continent was like not keeping up with the US, and some of them even had a negative growth rate. And here we have the same picture. This is 1990 to 2010. You know, some countries are doing a little bit better in terms of growth over this period, but, you know, what you would really like to see is, you know, a bunch of blue diamonds, like, you know, you want to see, I would love to see some growth miracles, and that region up there is just empty. So you see there are a few countries that are doing pretty well: Botswana, Namibia, Swaziland, but you know, mostly a pretty grim picture. And I will also point out South Africa and the Mediterranean coast of Africa are pretty different in terms of income. So when you think about Africa, just take the middle portion. Okay, so in terms of, you know, reducing extreme poverty, you know, how much progress has the world made? And I want to think even about a longer period than the UN is looking at. So here's a statistic I saw recently, which is that the share of people living in extreme poverty fell from 36% in 1990 to 15% in 2011. And the absolute number has also fallen. There's been great progress on goal number 1. You know, so some of this progress came after the turn of the millennium. Although I have to tell you, you know, there were jokes when those goals were first formulated. There's like additional detail in those goals about by this year we should achieve, you know, reduction below the 1990 level, you know, stuff like that. There were jokes, you know, that some of those targets were achieved, you know, before the goals were written. So, you know, the statistics always lag a little bit behind the rhetoric. All right, but there's been a lot of progress, and, you know, so I want to show you now some pictures that will, you know, convince you, if you didn't know already, a big part of this progress is India and China. And where, you know, you've probably guessed already, where is there still a remaining problem? It's sub-Saharan Africa. So these next pictures, these are from Xavier Saleh-Martin, who's an economist at Columbia. He's got a fantastic, you know, website. So if you're interested in global income levels and growth rate, look at Xavier's website. So these are pictures from him. Now the thing, if you want to think about how many people are living below, say, $1 a day, you have to know not only what is average income in a country, but you have to know, like, what's the distribution of that income. How equal, how unequal. And so Saleh-Martin has done an enormous amount of work using, you know, survey data, and so taking the GDP, you know, average GDP per capita, which you can get from the national income and product accounts, and using survey data to turn that, you know, turn those numbers into a distribution of income, you know, within these selected countries. So in particular for China, so this picture shows from 1970 to 2006 what's happened to the distribution of income within China. And so you see that in 1970, and these vertical lines, that's like $1 a day, you know, plus or minus 25 cents, something like that. So this is the kind of band that he thinks of as the $1 a day band. And notice this horizontal axis is a log scale. So every tick multiplies by 10. So you see in 1970, you know, a very large fraction of the Chinese population lived below $1 a day. And by 2000, it was a tiny number. And 2006, even smaller. You know, by now, it's probably, you know, very, very few people. Another thing you can see from this graph is, you know, the distribution of income used to be pretty concentrated. It's really fanned out. So everybody's getting richer, you know, pretty much everybody's getting richer, but not at an equal rate. And that's a typical pattern in developing countries. You know, not the income, when it's growing, usually inequality grows as well. Here's a similar picture for India. And again, you see that in 1970, a pretty high fraction of the Indian population lived below the poverty line. And that number has been very much reduced. So if you think about where reduction in poverty has come from, this is a big part of the story right there, because these two countries together have about 1/3 of the world's population, and they started out very poor. So what about the rest of the world? Has there been progress anyplace else? Well, you know, other parts of East Asia have done, you know, pretty well. Not maybe as well as China, but not so bad. So Indonesia, not so many people below $1 a day anymore. What you see in Indonesia, I guess I should say too, these pictures, the area under the curve is the population size. So you see Indonesia's had a lot of population growth. In China, you know, you see the one-child policy, not so much population growth. Bangladesh, okay, you know, maybe there's been some progress. There's a little more mass there to the right, so there's been some income growth, but still quite a few people in the $1 a region. Brazil, you see a fair amount of income growth, quite a bit of population growth, and progress in reducing poverty, but it's not entirely wiped out. And Nigeria. In Nigeria, I guess to my eye, you see basically just population growth and hardly any income growth at all. Okay, and you know, I could go on at some length about the connection between income, per capita income growth and population growth. But, you know, so it's, Nigeria as a country has a much bigger GDP than it used to, but, you know, per capita, things haven't changed much. Okay, and then here we have, this is a picture of the world in 1970. So this is the different lines here are different regions of the world. The pink line is the whole world, so that's the sum of the others. And you see that in 1970, East Asia and South Asia accounted for a lot of the poverty in the world. Sub-Saharan Africa, the black line, you know, so it's a smaller, much smaller region in terms of population, but a lot of poor people. And by 2006, you know, East Asia and South Asia have moved quite a bit to the right. Not too many people left here. And you know, a lot of the global poverty now is in Sub-Saharan Africa. There are pockets elsewhere in the world, but that's where, you know, a large part of it is. So some countries have been extremely successful in growing, and some haven't. So we want to ask, you know, why have some countries been able to grow? What are the proximate causes of growth? And so this part of you know, I think of this as like, this is for an economist, this is like the Sherlock Holmes part of this, you know. It's like you have different, we don't have a very, you know, a tremendously clear picture of, you know, like how to make a country grow, right? If we did, there wouldn't be any poverty left. So as economists, it's like we see different pieces of evidence. It's like, and we're like Sherlock Holmes trying to put together these clues to get a story that fits with all of the evidence about why, you know, what has allowed growth. So, to my mind, there are the 5 types of evidence that all point to technology. So, just empirical, you know, facts. So one is just the outcome when we do growth and development accounting exercises. You've probably seen some of those in your macro courses. A second is the fact that income levels have converged, you know, so much in the advanced countries. To me, that's evidence of a shared technology. You know, why else would you get that? Third is evidence on late bloomers, and then the, you know, growth miracles and wages of immigrants. So let's look at those. Okay, so let's think about growth and development accounting. So this is just, you've probably all seen this, you know, think of this as an aggregate production function with human capital and physical capital as the 2 inputs, K and H. It's got a Cobb-Douglas form, and A is labor augmenting technical change. So A multiplies H. And I've raised A and H to exponents that add up to 1. If that bothers you, just remember, A and H don't have any natural units. So think of it as just, you know, playing around with the units. Okay, now the thing, and I want to think of this one aggregate production function, the same function applying to the whole world, every country in the world at every date. And the only difference is the technology level. Okay, so if you play with that equation and look at, growth, you can use it to get an equation that says growth in Y can be broken down into 3 parts. There are a few different ways to do this, but I want to think of it as growth in the capital output ratio, growth in the human capital output ratio, and growth in A. Now, you can also do that just you can do a little different formulation that just has K and H rather than the ratios. Using the ratios means, the rationale for doing it is the following. If we have growth in technology, that raises the rate of return to both kinds of capital. And so people are going to acquire more. So, but I want to attribute growth of that type all to the technology. So I want to attribute to capital growth only what's needed to, if capital grows more than enough to, keep the rate of return in line. Okay, so notice there's no economics really here. This is just accounting, and we call it growth accounting if we use it for one equation over time, and we call it development accounting if we use it across countries. So just remember, you can just line up the countries in the world from, poorest to richest and do the same math across countries. And, so as a growth accounting exercise, this has been done, it's been around for a long time. It's been done, I would say, hundreds, thousands of times for the US. And people tried putting in lots of other stuff on the right-hand side as well. And almost regardless of what you put on the right-hand side, you end up with a big role for technology. So, and that's true for the US, and it's true for other countries as well. So that's just I haven't put a number here because, there have been so many studies. I wouldn't even know where to start to, but the technology always gets a very big role. If we look across countries, there are fewer studies because there's only one globe, so that helps. One of the first study was done back in the middle 90s, and so the statistics at that time only went up to 1988, and if we looked at 1988, at that time, a worker in the U.S. was 35 times more productive than a worker in Niger. My guess is that's still true. It may even, the difference may be even bigger now. And if you do this development accounting exercise, what you find is this factor of 35. This isn't 35%. This means, 35 times more productive. Some of it's physical capital, some of it's human capital, but, a big part is TFP. And that's true, it was true then, and it's true now that when you look across the globe, it's the TFP differences, well, they're residual. There's the stuff we can measure and the stuff we can't measure. The stuff that's the residual, we call it TFP. So that's enormous. Another piece of evidence, to my mind, another clue, is if you think about income levels in the rich countries, and for the rich countries, you can take the data back quite a lot farther. So on the vertical axis, we have a log scale. So the fact that these rich countries, they were much more fanned out back in 1870, and now, they're not identical, but there's been a lot of compression. So they're looking more and more alike. So what does that tell us in terms, like what you see here, like growth is not a very smooth process. You can see, the Great Depression, you see World War II, pretty bad for Europe. It actually raised GDP in the US, big boom. But I'm interested in just the overall trend, and so what I see is just compression. And to me, it's a clue that these countries share a technology. It's hard for me to think of any other reason why GDP per capita would be looking more and more similar. My next clue is, comes, it was an idea that goes back to an economic historian who talked about the advantages of backwardness. And that idea was picked up more recently by Parenti and Prescott, who looked at doubling times. So what do I mean by that? Here we have 65 countries where GDP per capita has reached $2,000. So on the horizontal axis, each dot is a country. The horizontal axis is the year they first reached $2,000. And the vertical axis is how many years after that did it take them to double their income. So, the first country to reach $2,000 up there, that circle, that's the Netherlands. And it took them, 85 years to double. The next one is the UK. It took them a long time. Then we have these Western offshoots. They were successful a little later, but then doubled quicker. And then more recently, we have, the East Asian miracle countries. They did that doubling in, like a decade, a little more than a decade. So to me, this is very strong evidence that the late bloomers, they're doubling faster. It's taken them less time. Why is that? I guess it's, maybe they're getting some advantages from the technologies developed by others. Okay, next we have these growth miracles. So I just pulled out a list of the countries that had, we need a definition of a miracle. So my criterion was a country where there was at least one 20-year episode with GDP per capita growth of at least 5% per year over that 20-year period. And at the end, they were at least 45% of the U.S. It was kind of sad to see there were some countries that they met the first criterion, and then they fell apart and tanked. And so I didn't want to call them miracles. So there are the 12 miracles, some from Western Europe. I mean, we could argue about in Germany, maybe a lot of it was post-war recovery, maybe in Japan also. But in the rest of these countries, they were not very rich before World War II, so it wasn't all recovery. Now, what can give such a miracle? Well, if we think about human capital, human capital doesn't increase for a whole country very fast, right? It's just the human capital of the labor force. You get a few new entrants every year. Maybe the existing workers pick up some human capital, but human capital just can't grow that fast. And physical capital, it just doesn't grow that fast either. Not to explain 5% growth, over 20 years. And then finally, if you think about wages of immigrants, a lot of adult immigrants who move to get a better paying job in a different country, a lot of them, they get very large wage gains. They're coming from poor countries, even, not very well educated immigrants, and they get pretty big wage boosts by moving to wherever they're coming to. And there are probably a lot of reasons for that. But one among several is probably just that they're working with better technologies in their destination country. Okay, so those are what I call the proximate, the technology to me is the proximate source of growth. But then we want to know, all right, so why do some countries successfully adopt technologies from abroad and others don't do it? So what are ultimate? It seemed like a very grand word, but I couldn't think of another one. So what lets some countries, climb onto the technological bandwagon? Now, for advanced countries, the countries at the frontier, they have to just develop the new technologies. So it's just, R&D. I would just call that R&D in its broadest sense. And I don't really have anything to say about that, here. I think it'll be interesting to see as China keeps developing, if they're like close to the frontier too, I guess they're going to be doing a lot of R&D. Like now the U.S. does a really large fraction of the whole world's R&D. If we get China in there, you know, we could be all growing much faster. Okay, but for less developed countries, these technology imports are critical, just getting in technology from abroad. And as we said, it's just, you know, the advantage of backwardness is you don't have to reinvent every wheel for yourself. Okay, so what facilitates those transfers? Now I want to show you a picture which suggests openness is crucial. So this is a picture with, here's 112 countries, GDP per capita in 1960 on the horizontal axis, and then the average annual growth rate of GDP per capita over the next 40 years. So this is all the countries in the world that we could get data for. This is the same picture, but now countries are divided into two groups. The blue countries here are the ones that Sachs and Warner in a famous paper categorized as open, and the rest are not. And so you see that by their definition of openness, you know, growth rates are much higher. It's like we have here sort of the upper envelope of countries here are the open countries, and the closed countries are not getting the growth that they should. I mean, you know, poor countries can get really, you know, even more growth than richer ones, but whatever your initial income level, you want to be open. Now, what did open mean? Maybe I'll look. There were quite a few criteria for openness. They have to have effective protection rates less than 40%, quotas on less than 40% of imports, no currency controls or black markets in currency, no export marketing boards, and not socialist. So Eastern Europe. You know, you sort of wonder, did they just, they added to this list until they got, like, you know, the slow guys all read. Well, still, you know, okay. But the data is what it is. So that's not my classification. That was Sachs and Warner. But there have been a lot of studies trying to link international trade and growth. So, you know, it's one of these things you can't, there's always a pretty good association. It's hard to, you know, say whether it's causation. Okay, so what else is important besides openness? Well, we saw that India and China are two, you know, leading candidates for, you know, some kind of regime change that spurred growth. So let's go back and just look at the historical record and see what happened. Well, in China in 1978, Deng Xiaoping delivered his famous speech. You know, this was really when China went from being a communist country to, you know, started on the road to capitalism. And in his speech, he said, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white. If it catches mice, it's a good cat. So then that was the beginning of, that was really the beginning of growth for China. It's just, you know, it started slowly, opening up, you know, giving farmers the right to have some small plots that they, you know, controlled, and allowing some small businesses, allowing some private, you know, traders into foreign trade. In India, I would say it was, you know, it was also it's been a gradual process, I would say, you know, and still not as complete in India. And in India, it took the form of what people call the license Raj, which was just, if you wanted to start, you know, think about how technologies get implemented. You know, you think about entrepreneurs, small businesses. Well, in India, it was very hard to start a small business. Right? You needed a lot of licenses. You had to pay off a lot of people. So that's what people called the license Raj. And it stifled entrepreneurship. So that's That's changed a lot. I think it has not, it probably still, there's a lot left to do in India. Okay, so, and together they have, you know, a huge part of the world population, so that's that. Okay, so if we think about what's going to be required to bring growth to the parts of the world that have not yet enjoyed such rapid growth, I guess these, you know, they're going to need better, you know, better institutions and openness. That's the end of what I want to say about growth. And so now I want to look a little bit at these other goals, the education and health goals. And we'll see there's been a big reduction in child mortality, and that's come from vaccines, from oral rehydration therapy, and malaria prevention. That's been a big part there. I'm going to look at the statistics for health. I'm going to look at sub-Saharan Africa. The rest of the world is doing pretty well. So like income, you know, the problem is there. Okay, so we'll start with education. And this graph shows, there's at the top there, that's the fraction of the eligible age population that's in primary school. And you see that it's gotten, it was high even in 2000. It's gotten better. And the number, these bars are the number of kids who should be in school who are not. So that's fallen quite a lot from 100, this is measured in, I think, in millions. So we had 100 million, and now it's down to 57 million. And I guess for the ladies in the crowd, notice that, you know, the pinks are catching up with the blues. So it used to be much more gender inequality in access to primary education. So there's been a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of improvement. There's still some ways to go. This picture shows mortality rates for children under 5. And this is sub-Saharan Africa. And just for comparison, I put the U.S. and Sweden. Sweden's, you know, even better than the U.S. And there's China. So China's had a big improvement. You know, these countries were already low, and they've improved a little. But you see a lot of improvement, you know, even in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is over 50 years. But there's been some improvement in the you know, from 2000 to 2010. This figure looks at life expectancy at birth. And you see, remember, that's always calculated. It's like you take the survival rates at every age, you know, this year. So it's so you see a big improvement in China. Sweden and the U.S. are high, and, you know, small improvements. And you see some improvement, and you see some improvement from 2000 on in Africa. And in Rwanda, you see, you know, the devastating effect of, you know, a civil war. Maternal mortality rates, you see a little progress, and they're still extremely high. Again, the U.S. and China are here for comparison. So there's been, you know, substantial improvement, but still, they're still quite high. And here's the number of people living with HIV. That goes up to 2009. You see, you know, a big increase, and then it's kind of leveled off. Okay, so let's stop there, and I want to, you know, think about the question: what's been the source of progress, where we've seen progress, and what's, you know, and to me, it's kind of different for the different goals. So if you think about the income goals, the success has come from China, India, and some other countries that have, you know, they've had good growth performance. It's got nothing to do with the UN, to my mind. I mean, it's very nice that the UN stated the goal, but what happened in India and China had nothing to do with the UN. On the health goals, it may have had some effect because, those reductions in child mortality, they were not coming because of such rapid income growth in Africa. They were coming because, the World Health Organization or Doctors Without Borders or other groups have gone in and provided vaccines, provided, insecticide-treated nets to prevent malaria and so on. So on the health goals, I think the UN actually had they may have had some influence on the income goals. I would say, they were bystanders. Okay, so I want to leave a little time for questions, and discussion. So I'll just say here, the UN now they have a working group that has now 17 potential, candidate goals for next time. They don't fit on one slide, but there are some. Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Thinking, how about peace and justice for all? Goodwill towards man, for all. To my mind, these next goals could use. They need to be a little shorter, snappier, maybe better focused. So, all right. So, but what do you think? I mean, it's going to be this is going to be your millennium. These questions.
You mentioned that basically the UN can't really take credit for the growth that's occurred, but that since they can take some more credit on health goals. What do you think, sort of in any kind of broad sense, about what the role of international institutions like the UN is for sort of setting and helping countries achieve economic goals and health goals? And should the UN only focus on health goals, given that, or sort of where can international institutions be effective?
That's a great question, and I don't have much of an answer. The UN, it seems like a lot of people write off the UN as just, pretty much a useless institution. I would give it maybe a little more credit than that. One place where they've had some effect is, they send in peacekeeping trips. So one reason, if you think about why is Africa still so poor, it's a country with an enormous amount of political instability, civil wars, cross-border wars. And those are, how can you expect a country to even maintain a stable income, let alone grow, if there's, armed conflict? So the UN has had some success sending in peacekeepers. Maybe that's maybe that's useful. There are other international institutions. The World Trade Organization has been working away for years trying to lower trade barriers. If we think trade is important for growth, that's useful. And then there's, the World Health Organization and, UNICEF. They work on health issues. So I don't want to say those institutions are, have no function whatsoever. But I would say, it's certainly not an easy matter to say what kind of success can be attributed to whom and on what dimensions. That's hard. I would say in terms of just the, the countries that have succeeded in, kind of jumping on the long run growth bandwagon, that had nothing to do with the UN. That I'm pretty confident about. Mm-hmm.
So you talked a lot about the importance of these poor countries catching up technologically, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering how much of this improvement in technology is going to come from foreign direct investment from countries like the US and China, and you see all these big investment that China is doing in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the importance of these foreign direct investments in promoting growth in these countries? Or do you still see as other economists would argue, Piketty is versus both capital, that there is a large risk of these foreign direct investments only benefiting the people who are actually making these investments?
Yeah, I think that's way too pessimistic. I think foreign direct investment is probably one of the big vehicles for technology transfer. And there's, you know, the evidence, a little evidence on that is starting to develop. You know, that's, so some economists who've looked at Latin America find that in industries where there's been foreign direct investment, domestic firms have had higher TFP growth as well. So it does seem that, you know, there's, you know, when I would say the foreign direct investment has, you know, there's two parts. One is just the jobs it creates for, you know, for locals. So that's a good thing. And the second is if there are technology spillovers to firms in upstream industries, downstream industries, the same industry. But, you know, there's, you know, one part of foreign direct investment is the one beneficial effect is just the jobs it creates. And, you know, like sometimes there's a lot, you know, sometimes there's a lot of rhetoric, which I think is just totally misguided about, you know, global capitalism and how we're exploiting poor countries. Well, you know, it's, you know, you look at the Nike factory in a poor country. Well, maybe the working conditions there aren't the same as they are at a factory in the US. Nevertheless, when that factory goes in, you know, people are lined up, you know, a mile deep trying to get jobs. So, you know, in a poor country, people have really terrible alternatives. And the Nike factory, even if it's not up to our standards, for them, it's much less terrible than their next best alternative. So it provides, you know, a better job, better wages than the alternative. You know, it's kind of interesting that if you look at TFP by sector across countries, on average, poor countries have a comparative disadvantage in agriculture. So poor countries, they have lower TFP in everything, but it's not quite as bad in manufacturing and other industry as it is in agriculture. So, you know, how do countries, you know, how have China and India grown? A part of it's moving people out of agriculture, which is, you know, in a poor country, a very, you know, poorly paid occupation, into, you know, those, you know, maybe factories, you know, set up by American firms, Western European firms, Chinese firms. They pay much better. Mm-hmm.
So in 2000, these were named the Millennium Development Goals, and now we're saying that the new set of goals are going to be called the Sustainable Development Goals?
Apparently so, yeah.
So how would you say that sustainability plays into economic development? And, you know, how does that play into the new goals that they're looking at?
Well, and if you just count how many times the word sustainable appears, it's all over the place. So that seems to be, you know, the word of the day. What does it exactly mean? I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, if it means, you know, we're not going to let poor countries burn any fossil fuels, you know, God help them. I mean, you know, that we don't have good energy alternatives. So I would say if sustainable means that, you know, the poor countries better hope for non-sustainable, because we're still in for a period of fossil fuels. Yeah, I don't know what, you know, I don't know what sustainable means. Okay, so you can, you know, write to your UN representative and, you know, pay. You know, I still think, you know, in terms of just, you know, punchiness, you know, those old goals, you know, where are they? It wasn't a bad list. I mean, maybe it can use a little updating, but, you know, we want, you know, I think a goal, part of it is just to be a bit of a slogan. So, you know, like, give me liberty or give me death is better than, you know, like, you know, 2 full paragraph goal. Okay, thank you.